So as you know, we previously went back from our last report about some of the changes that were going to be coming into smoke and carbon monoxide alarm regulations in 2015. Now we actually have the final guidance, the amendments in 2022. So we're going to go through that this evening. As per previous webinars, if you haven't joined us before, maximum 1 hour, so we'll be finishing by 8:30. As it's just one piece of legislation to go through, I'm hoping we will finish sooner. So we'll go for the presentation, there'll then be a Q&A section at the end for you to quiz me on anything that I haven't covered or any questions you've got regarding the legislation. So if anybody just wants to join us in the meantime, you are able to. So what are the current regulations? So as I'm sure all of you know, there has to be a smoke alarm on each floor of the property. CO2 alarm where there's any solid fuel burning appliance, so an open fire and oil boiler, and the landlord's responsibility to test on the first day of the tenancy, and then it's the tenant's responsibility to maintain those alarms throughout the tenancy. It's a lot more getting set in stone now, but that's what I'm sure you're all quite aware of. So the main amendments that are coming into this is there has to be a CO2 alarm. So currently there doesn't have to be a CO2 alarm, it says there should. It doesn't say must, so it now is becoming must, so it's a legal requirement. So there must be a CO2 alarm in all rooms of fixed combustion appliance, so gas boiler, hob, etc., but it excludes a gas cooker. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about what is a gas cooker and what are the government defining as a gas cooker a little bit later on. So if you've got a gas boiler in most of them are in the kitchen, if you've got one in sort of a cupboard in a hallway, which a lot of properties do upstairs, garage, loft, etc., these are now coming into these regulations. So we're going to have to make sure you've got those CO2 alarms. Now, most landlords that we deal with here at Complete, we are making sure they have the CO2 alarms anyway, because in our eyes, a leaking gas hob or a leaking boiler is more likely, unfortunately, to cause carbon monoxide poisoning and potential death to your tenant than a wood burner leaking CO2, which was the previous regulations. It is still landlord's responsibility to test on the first day of the tenancy. Oh, thanks for that, jumped ahead of me. And you must repair or replace if there are any faults. I can hear someone in the background here. Whoever's on, would you mind putting yourself on mute? Because I can hear somebody else talking. So we'll just go into a little bit more detail in a second about exactly what that means, about your responsibilities as the landlord and to repair and replace. We'll go into that a bit later, but those are the two main changes. It's the CO2 alarms and now a legal requirement. And it is a legal requirement for you to repair or replace if there is a fault with an alarm, and we need to think about what a fault is a little bit later as well. But that's the two main changes that are coming in on the 1st of October. So the government aren't saying on the 1st of October, you've got a month to sort this. The government's saying on the 1st of October, so in less than a month's time, your property has to be up to date with this regulation. You cannot be given any leeway after that. So we must make sure all your properties are compliant by then. It's not a relatively difficult thing to do compared to some of the things that government have bought in or are bringing in. Smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms are relatively easy to get a hold of and install yourselves. So it's not a big ask. I don't think the government making it, I think it's quite a sensible one. So it shouldn't cause too many issues making sure your property is ready. So what is a gas cooker? This was something we covered in the last webinar. We were waiting for the government to confirm what is a gas cooker. And their wording exactly is any appliance heated by gas and used for cooking foods. So gas cookers, ovens, integrated gas hobs are all exempt from having a carbon monoxide alarm. Why? I'm not 100% sure. It seems a little bit of a strange one to me, because I would say that a leaking gas hob is more likely to cause carbon monoxide poisoning than anything else in the property. But the government guidance does say any appliance heated by gas and used for cooking foods classes as a gas cooker in this legislation, and so that would be exempt. I think one of our legal, advisors did say that they think it's because most boilers are in the kitchen, which is where a gas hob would be. So the government think they're covering two bases there. I do think that's a little bit risky. But Best practice, you probably should provide one anyway, but by law, you don't have to. Just if your boiler isn't in the kitchen and you've just got an integrated gas hob, you don't have to have a carbon monoxide alarm in that kitchen. But if you've got a wood burner in the lounge, you still would have to have one there as well. So if you've got an Arga in the kitchen and then a gas hob set on a freestanding gas cooker, because you've got both, you will still need the carbon monoxide alarm for the Arga, but you wouldn't need it for the gas hob. So that's a slightly strange one, but that is what they have put into the legislation. So we were waiting that, so we have now had clarification. Oh, come on, computer. So there's been a lot of talk around battery versus hardwired. So in Scotland and Wales, they do stipulate in their legislation they do have to be hardwired. However, the guidance that's been released clearly says they are a better option, but there is no requirement for linked alarms. So you don't have to have fully mained wired smoke alarms in your property. Their guidance just says they are a better option. The guidance does also state, and I will send this out in the email following up tomorrow, that the smoke alarms should, it doesn't say must, adhere to the current British standard, which is for a smoke alarm, if anybody's interested right now, BS 58396. And for a CO2 alarm, BS 50291. But I will email that out tomorrow. But it doesn't say you have to have them to that standard. It's saying that you should have them to that standard. It doesn't say must. Again, it's a better option, like the hardwired is a better option than battery alarms. It's likely it may change in the future if we follow suit with Scotland and Wales. English private rented law is always a few years behind. It's likely that they will have to be hardwired in the future. So that is something to bear in mind if you've got a new property that you're doing up now. It may be worth putting hardwired ones in, but it's not a legal requirement. Battery ones are absolutely fine. Exactly the same for CO2 alarms. Little battery ones you can buy in B&Q for £20 odd. You can get them and stick them up on top of a unit. They're absolutely fine. There's no requirement for them to be hardwired. Same, you can get dual ones. You can get dual smoke and CO2 alarms, as long as they're placed within certain meters of appliances, which we'll go through in a minute. They're absolutely fine. They're normally hardwired anyway, but they're also absolutely fine if they're dual smoke and CO2. That's fine. Tenant is still responsible for testing, and replacing batteries. So that hasn't really changed. They're just now actually putting that into the guidance for this law. So it does strongly state in there that tenant is responsible for testing throughout the tenancy. You are on the first day of the tenancy to ensure that when that tenant moves into the property, those alarms are working. And their tenants are responsible for replacing batteries. So the guidance does state that if a tenant finds a fault with a smoke or carbon monoxide alarm, they should be testing that alarm and then replacing the batteries first before they report it to the agent or landlord to say there is a fault. The tenants should do that first. And we need to be advising these tenants in tenancy agreements and welcome packs and move-in packs that is their responsibility, to make sure they are testing regularly and that they are replacing their batteries at the first instance if they think there is a fault. So that's just something to bear in mind with your tenancy agreements there as well. So going on to tenants' responsibilities, that was well worked in there. So tenants in this guidance, tenants should regularly test. Regularly is quite broad. When you look on the fire service regulations and the guidance, they say once a week at least. And once a month is sort of once a month, but once a week at the least sort of thing. So that's what they're saying. Changing batteries, fire service say they should be done annually anyway. We should be changing our batteries annually. So that's something we should be advising tenants as well. The guidance does state that landlords should provide tenants with information on how to test alarms. And again, that's what we're saying, it should be included in the tenancy agreement. So here at Complete, what we have started doing is we've made this little brochure leaflet that tells tenants how to test their smoke alarms. It does feel like we're teaching people how to suck eggs a little bit, but that the guidance says that. So what we don't want to happen is there to be a fire in a property and a judge to turn around and say, well, you didn't provide the tenants with any information on how to test them, so they didn't test them to check they were working. So when our tenants move in, they've signed to say they've had a smoke alarm guidance sheet, which clearly states on there that they test, but they should be testing once a week to once a month. That's all on there, and they need to report to the landlord. So it's advice on how to do that. Ours goes as simple as they should be which button to press, that's on there as well. And it does state in our tenancy agreement that the tenants are responsible for testing, and you need to make sure if you are doing your own tenancy agreements, if you're not a complete landlord, that that is in your tenancy agreements, that tenants acknowledge that they are responsible for testing the alarms regularly, and you can set out a time frame in there, and that they are responsible for replacing batteries in their smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. Making sure that's in your tenancy agreement is going to be really important to resolve any issues further down the line. So it has become a little bit broader on what the tenants should be doing. So that's a positive step, definitely, with this new legislation that's come in. So fitting alarms, so smoke alarms, it doesn't, in the guidance, it says there isn't any official guidance on where a smoke alarm should be put. It should be done based on the manufacturer's guidance, which 9 times out of 10, or 99.9% of the time, I imagine, will say on the ceiling of the property. The amount of times we see smoke alarms on the side of a wall, it's just not going to, smoke rises, it's just not going to work there. So as long as they're with manufacturer's details, so to refuse all doubt, make sure on the ceiling of each floor of the property. Now, each floor is a physical floor that you're in on the property that you're using. So if you've got, no, spoke about this last time, a flat above a shop, when you go in that first level, you've literally just got a little entrance hallway and your stairs up, that still classes as a floor. So you want as soon as you go into that entrance, and then you need one at the top of the stairs where the flat is. And if it's amazing that flat, you're going to need one on the next floor as well. Same 3-story property, and you want a ground floor, first floor, second floor level. So you need to make sure you have got those in place. They haven't annoyingly set out what a floor constitutes, because in some properties, we get quite a few older properties, you sort of have a mezzanine floor, so you have a floor level, then I guess you're going up the stairs, the bedroom and bathroom, and then there's 6 more steps, and there's 2 more bedrooms. If you do look at what constitutes a staircase, I believe it's 11 steps. So take that as sort of using common sense. If it's more than 11 steps, it's going to constitute a floor. For sort of best practice, I would say just put one on each floor to cover yourself and make sure that's documented. So if you have got, you know, a bed halfway up the stairs, you've got a bedroom and a bathroom, put a smoke alarm there, then you've got another half of the stairs, but it's only 6 steps, just put another smoke alarm on that level. There is no point in risking it for a £20 odd that a smoke alarm is going to cost you. That it isn't worth the risk to your tenants' lives or your own liability if something does happen in the property. So I'll just make sure anything that could potentially be classed as a floor in your property has a smoke alarm on it, would be my advice. Carbon monoxide alarms, again, they haven't given much guidance apart from head height, but they have said head height, which is generally on the wall or on top of a unit. So that's where we're in kitchens, and you just pop it on top of the unit within 1 to 3 meters of that appliance. So it shouldn't be any closer, it shouldn't be further away. So where we've got a gas boiler in a cupboard and up on the stairwell, where should we be putting that carbon monoxide alarm? Again, there's no official guidance on that. Within the cupboards will be within 1 meter of the appliance, and that is where it's going to leak the most. If you put it outside on the hallway, potentially it's going to get out the cupboard door to set the alarm off. So the current legal advice I've had recently is put it in that cupboard with that boiler, so that you know that it's going to go off if there's any leakage at all. Head height, again, it's just a funny one. I'm completely, I'm a foot shorter than my husband, so there's a big difference there in head height for CO2 alarms, but the guidance just say e.g. on top of a unit on a wall, so you take your own stance on that. A sensible decision would be on top of the kitchen unit. What we do find sometimes in rental properties, obviously where they're freestanding on top of a unit, tenants do move them, they can move them, bin them, drop them, lose them. So my advice would be to make sure they are fixed either on top of the unit or fixed on a wall, just so that it remains in the property and you know it's there. So a partial or whole livable room is where these CO2 alarms have to be, and this is where we go into having boilers in garages and attics. They are partial, they can be classed as partial livable rooms, because you would store items in an attic, you would go into a garage, so they're partially livable because you do go into them. So they do need them as well. If you've got a boiler in a garage, you need to have a CO2 alarm in the garage. You've got a boiler up in the attic, you do need one up in the attic. So if it starts leaking carbon monoxide in the attic, we need to be alerting the tenants. Potentially you're asleep below, if that starts going through that attic hatch, they need to be aware of that before that starts happening. So you do need a CO2 alarm if you've got a boiler in a garage or an attic as well. So any room where there's anything, just put an alarm up. That would be my advice on this one. Anywhere there is one, just get the alarms up to get yourselves covered. Oh, my laptop's been fancy then. So heat detectors. So this is common with a lot of new builds. A lot of new build kitchens, a lot of kitchens in new builds have heat detectors in the kitchens as opposed to smoke alarms. The legislation clearly states heat detectors are not a direct replacement for smoke alarms. So they will not count if you have a heat detector. If it's smoke and heat, fine. But if it's a heat detector on its own, which some new build properties do, especially in flats, not acceptable. You need to also install a smoke alarm, which means the beautiful little new build will also need a lovely extra alarm next to it, but that does have to be done. So do check, especially if you are purchasing a new build on a buy-to-let basis, what are they putting in there? They are normally quite good with compliance, but a lot of them do just have heat detectors put up. So do check what you've got or what you're getting so that you can make sure that's right. So there's one very clear statement they have put in this guidance is that they will not be accepted. Just to bear in mind there. So that's sort of the roundup of the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. I hope that's covered. If the only exemptions, which I do sometimes get asked, are shared accommodation with the landlord. So if you've got a tenant as a lodger within your property, then you're exempt from this. Student halls, but only halls, not private student housing. And if it's all social housing, unless it's been told it's exempt as well, and unlicensed HMOs are exempt, but HMOs have their own laws around that anyway, so that is slightly different. If your property is not compliant by the 1st of October, I can't get the words out, you will be charged £5,000 per breach. So if it's that you haven't got a smoke alarm on one floor, for example, you haven't got a CO2 alarm in the kitchen next to your boiler, that's £10,000. So it's not just per case, it's per breach. So just bear that in mind, it's £5,000 and that starts from the 1st of October. So do make sure that everything is up to date and that that's all covered for you and that you are responding to those tenants. So some advice that I've actually picked up today that has come through in terms of the alarm. So in terms of faulty, they haven't disclosed whether an out-of-date alarm is faulty, but I would class that as faulty. So you do need to be checking your dates on your smoke and carbon monoxide alarms that are in the property. Little things when new legislation like this comes in, sounds awful, but sometimes something has to go to court for us to actually get some guidance on what we need to do, a judge ruling. So sort of to avoid anything like that happening, I would say anything that is out of date, and they normally have a 5 to 10 year life for them, so they're quite lengthy, replace it now. So you've got brand new alarms in the property and make a note of what their expiry dates are for the future. Because if a tenant reports to you that they have expired, they've gone past their best before date, I would say that would class as faulty and they would need to be replaced. You don't want to get into a situation when there's a fire, the smoke alarm hasn't gone off, and the tenant or the tenant's family take you to court, and the judge says, well, your smoke alarm was faulty and the tenant did report it to you, so please cover yourself from that instance. They have sort of released today when a fault is reported, little bit bland, it does say you should action as soon as possible, which doesn't give much hope to anybody, really doesn't really advise. As soon as possible to us would mean within 7 days. It's an urgent. So we would want that done within 3 to 7 days, ideally sooner. I think we can all agree that smoke alarms are extremely important in properties and CO2 alarms. If it isn't done as soon as possible and the tenant reports it to the council will enforce works on you. They enforce an action order, and that gives you 21 days to comply. It gives you 21 days to do it, and you don't want the local authority breathing down your neck, because not only will they check your smoke alarms, they'll then come and check the rest of your property as well. So just if your tenant reports a fault to you, make sure that you get it sorted ASAP. So before we go on to Q&A session, just some other legislation bits that I just want to make you aware of, which will be coming up in the future, things that have come up very recently, so just to keep you up to date. Equal rights, I'm sure you're all aware that if you have a tenant with some form of disability in property, they have the right to request changes to your property. So they want to put a wet room in, or they want to put a stair lift in, they have the right to that. You can't refuse that due to equal rights, but they have to pay for it. Now, what they are changing or putting into place now, and it's going to come through pretty soon, is that the tenants will have the right to request changes to communal areas. So this is going to come into space in blocks of flats, essentially. Very difficult one, and we're not quite sure how that's going to work, because if you've got a block of flats, which, you know, a tenant requests to put a lift in, or widening of a staircase, or widening of an entrance hallway, or anything like that, it's going to have to go to the leaseholder. It's going to get a little bit complicated, but it's just something to be aware of, that is going through government currently. And it's very close to being released, but it's sort of gone under the radar or anything else that's been going on. But once we know more about that, we will let people know. EPC regulations, we spoke about briefly last time as well, about the changes that are coming in 2025 to 2028. The government are reconsidering the cap after a lot of lobbying by letting agents and landlords. £10,000 is a very high cap. Concerned the current cap is 3,000. They are wanting to put that up to 10,000. So apparently that is being redebated, reconsidered at the moment in Parliament. Hopefully that will change slightly. We have got an upcoming webinar in October with Target CO2, a company going to be chatting about how to improve your property's EPC rating. So really important if your property isn't currently a C, to attend that one. We'll be releasing details on that one soon. So that'd be a really good one for you all to attend. And the white paper, so the biggest thing I get asked about at the moment. So we've been through that last time, all the points out at 12 points, and the recording is on our website if you weren't able to make it and you wanted to watch that one back. There is an inquiry, which is interesting. So the Levelling Up Committee, who are obviously part of this Levelling Up white paper that came out, have actually launched an inquiry into their own paper, which sort of suggests that they weren't quite happy with that one. So that's interesting. That's going through at the moment. So there are lots of lobbying and inquiries going into it afterwards, but the actual Levelling Up Committee have launched an inquiry into their own white paper. So nothing's drastically going to change. Don't get too excited. Nothing will drastically change, but maybe that some measures may be relaxed slightly compared to what they are. But that is something that they are considering at the moment. So that's everything I wanted to go through on there. So we can do, let's just stop screen sharing so we can actually see. Lovely. So at the bottom here, there is a chat box, which is the agent. Oh, thank you, Mark, for answering that question. What's an EPC? So the EPC is your energy performance certificate. We have to give that to a tenant. You have to have that in order to market your property for sale or for let. So you have to have one of those. And the rating will be changing. It's currently an E. By 2025, any new tenancies must be a C. And by 2028, all tenancies will need to be a C, all properties. So that is what's coming in. And we have, like I said, we've got a webinar coming up in October with Target CO2, who are a company who are an energy efficiency specialist. They mainly specialise in residential property, and they're going to be talking about how, the pitfalls, how to avoid them, and that's what they can offer as well. And mainly about talking about how to get your property, if it's an ED, up to a C, which obviously you're going to need to do relatively quickly. So I feel like we've done a very quick whistle-stop tour there of the regulations that are coming in. So if anybody's got any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat box at the bottom, and I can answer any questions you've got. Yes, Adrian. So if completing managing your property for us, do you take care of the alarms and notify the tenant? Yes, we do. So on our periodic inspections, which are every 3 to 6 months, and we've been doing this since we knew this was going to be coming in about a year ago, we test all the alarms on the inspections anyway. We don't have to do that, but we just do that as a matter of course. But a best practice, working for you. If we can see them, we are checking the alarms to check if they've got any best before dates on them. We're recording those in our system, so if they are coming up, that we are making sure that landlords are notifying their change. And as I said, when tenants are moving into properties and their tenancy agreements, we are alerting all tenants that it's their responsibility to be testing the alarms, how to test the alarm. We'll be providing everybody with that leaflet that we've drawn up as well. So yes, if you're a complete landlord and we manage your property, we are covering this legislation for you. So we'll make sure that your property is compliant. And obviously, if your tenants do report any issues or faults with your alarms, we will report that to you straight away and have those rectified as soon as possible, as the legislation states. But, you know, as I say, we sort of treat that as an emergency. So you'll be covered. Are there any other questions at all on the legislation or any other legislation that might be coming up? I'm free on that one. So I will email everybody out tomorrow with a follow-up with the current British standards for the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. So you've got the numbers of those if you are replacing them, if you want to replace them with the ones that the government are recommending. So you've got those British standard numbers. Like I said, you don't have to, but it would be advised, especially if you put new ones in, if yours have expired or you've got a new property, that you do put the ones in that are completely up to date and what the government are advising. I would advise hardwired over battery. You don't have to, but if you now get to the point where, okay, all your alarms are 12 years old and they're all out of date, you need to replace them all, have a chat with an electrician. It's not a ridiculously expensive job for them to do, depending on how many floors are in your property, but it is worth getting them to do. Can you confirm the rules on gas hobs and carbon monoxide sensors? Yes, of course. So as far as the guidance says, it's advising, obviously, it's an mixed gas that cooks food. So a gas hob works off gas and it cooks food. So it doesn't need a carbon monoxide alarm, as per the legislation. However, my advice would be to put one anyway, because gas hobs are one of the most likely things to leak in a property. But if you go by textbook, you don't have to have one because it cooks food. So you don't have to have one for a gas hob. But I would recommend to have one. You would need one if you had your boiler and your gas hob in the same room, because you need one for the boiler anyway. But if you've just got a gas hob in a kitchen, by letter of the law, you don't have to have a carbon monoxide alarm there. Is that one? Lovely. So are there any more questions that anybody's got for me? I appreciate it's just one bit of legislation tonight, but hopefully that has given you all enough information to make sure you're all ready for the 1st of October when that comes in. Does community heating need, sorry, just had an answer from Mark, does community heating need a carbon monoxide alarm? No, it doesn't, because it runs off electric, Mark. So no, you don't with that one. Do you check the expiry dates on the sensors you manage for property? Yes, we do. As long as we can see them. So when we're doing inspections, we're testing the alarms. If you manage your property, every time your property has an inspection, we physically test the smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. We don't have to do that, but we're just doing that to make sure that we are recording that your alarms have been tested. So we are doing that. And if we can see, if there's, not all of them are obvious, but I know mine's got a best before sort of sticker on the side of it at home, we are checking and we are recording those dates on there. So yes, if you're a managed landlord of ours, we are doing that for you. And I've got a few more questions coming through. We're speculating you to monitor as it works when you may not be in the room. Gas cooker, you're probably in the room. Yeah, I completely, I think CO2 alarm, just if you've got any gas appliance, just have a CO2 alarm. I'm sure that makes more sense. Just to make sure. I understand, obviously, if you leave the room, your boiler, you won't necessarily smell the CO2, perhaps it's what they're saying with the gas hob, but I do just think it's best practice just to have one. But I do see a point there, Mark. Caroline, do you know how long a battery smoke sensor lasts for? Again, it's normally manufacturer guidance. I know my battery smoke alarms at home had a 10-year life on them. However, I think when you buy new now, that always seems to get reduced, and I think they're anything between 2 to 5 years now. Excuse me. But it just depends on the smoke alarm that you buy. But it used to be about 10 years, but I think they're going back down, a bit like boiler warranties now. They used to guarantee a boiler for 10 years. Now it's gone down to 5, and they're talking about some of these boilers guarantees going down to 3. So in answer to your question, Karen, I'm not 100% sure. It depends on your manufacturer, depends how old your battery alarm is. But I would probably say 5 years would be my guess on those, maximum 10, but just worth checking next time you do an inspection on yours. My boiler is in the airing cupboard in the bathroom, and there is no window in that room. Oh, excuse me. So boiler is in the airing cupboard in the bathroom. There's no window in that room. Where does the carbon monoxide sensor go? So just between 1 to 3 meters of that boiler. So if it's in the airing cupboard, you can fix a carbon monoxide alarm into the airing cupboard. That's absolutely fine. The fact there's no window doesn't matter. It's still a livable room, so it still has to have a CO2 alarm. I would just put it in the airing cupboard with the boiler, so it's fixed to the wall, and so as soon as that leaks any carbon monoxide, it's going to go off straight away. That would be my advice on that one. That was a flurry of questions. Anybody else got any other questions? If you do think of any overnight, when I email the follow-up tomorrow, I'm more than happy for you to email me, quiz me, anything further you think anything overnight, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem at all. Let's see if I've got any further ones on there. Just checking I've answered all of those ones. Oh, I've got some new, so all done. So each relevant room needs a fire. No, so Adrian, each floor needs a smoke alarm. So each floor of a property needs to have a smoke alarm. Any room where there is that gas appliance or solid fuel burning appliance needs a CO2 alarm. So smoke alarm on each floor. So generally you'd have one on the hallway. Say it's a standard 2-story, 2-bedroom house. You'd have one in the hallway when you go in, or in the kitchen, and you'd have one at the top of the stairs on your landing, and then you'd have a CO2 alarm in the kitchen because that's where your gas hob and your gas boiler is. That's your standards. You don't need one in every room, but you do need one that any room there's a fuel burning or gas appliance. So there's a wood burner, oil fire boiler, gas fires, etc. So gas fires, obviously you do need a CO2 alarm for gas fire, and you need a smoke alarm on each floor. So I think that's your query covered there, Adrian, hopefully. If you've already got a fire alarm on that floor, you won't need a heat alarm. You don't have to have a heat alarm. Heat alarm isn't law. Just a lot of new build properties have heat alarms put in as opposed to smoke alarms, and heat alarms are not acceptable in terms of this law. A heat alarm, as far as the private residential letting property, doesn't mean anything. It's not going to gain you anything. So I wouldn't ever put heat alarms into your property. A lot of new build properties do have them, and if they do, make sure you've got a smoke alarm up next to it. Or a lot of these are dual smoke and heat, so they come together, so and they're fine, but not a heat alarm on its own. Perfect. So any more for any more? It's starting to go dark. I can't believe this. It feels like winter, doesn't it? It's September and it's going dark at 8 o'clock at night. And all the Christmas stuff sat in the shops. I'm sure you've all noticed that as well. Walking into Tesco the other day with advent calendars. That's a little bit frightening. It's September and there's advent calendars out already. Oh, lovely. Okay, so I think that's everybody's questions. I hope everybody feels like they've learned something and you're ready for the 1st of October. So as I said, we'll be letting you know webinars coming up. So on the 20th of September this month, we've got the first investment power hour. So that's with me. That is going through the basics of investing in buy-to-let property. So that's working out your yields, how to gain the most from your property, what you should be looking for, where you should be looking in this area as well. Should we go through a little bit sort of localized to Devon, good areas to be investing in, where your best yields are, types of property. We look a little bit about spending, what, you know, if we've got X amount of cash, what should we be doing that? Where should we be putting it? So that's coming up on the 20th of September. That's on our website ready for you to sign up for. We've then got coming up in October, we've got a couple of webinars there. One I've definitely got confirmed, I said, is Target CO2. That's going to be all about how to improve your property's EPC rating, and that will relate to private residential properties, so your own homes, as well as rental properties. They work across both sides, so it's worth coming to if your own property at home perhaps isn't quite up to standard and you're struggling to remortgage on that, because obviously mortgage lenders are getting a little bit tight about what, you know, properties they will lend on with a low EPC rating. Then going to November, a very popular and highly requested webinar is going to be another one with Andrew Brown, who is head of tax at Bishop Fleming. Those of you who attended his Making Tax Digital one last month, it was a really informative webinar. And a lot of people got a lot of information from that. He's coming back in November the 11th, I believe, but I will confirm that. And that is going to be about reducing your tax liabilities and capital gains tax. So that is something that affects absolutely everybody. So Making Tax Digital is coming in. Those of you, that are going to be applicable for that, that was a fantastic webinar, and you can catch up on the recording. But he is coming back in November to do another general tax webinar regarding reducing your tax liabilities and reducing capital gains tax. So that's going to be a really important webinar for everybody. And we'll be having another investment power hour in November as well, which will be slightly more specific, looking at portfolio investment there as well. And then hopefully in December, we'll have an end of year roundup and looking into 2023. So that's what we've got coming up. Thank you for attending this evening. I will follow up tomorrow with those little details that I went through with those standard alarms with the recording as well. So if you want to watch back through, and we will let you know when all those other webinars are released. If you haven't already, please do sign up to attend the Renting Minefield event on the 22nd of September at Exeter Racecourse, if you're in the area. That is held by Exeter City Council, and it's now joint with Teignbridge District Council. That is a big event that the councils run. They have lots of guest speakers, solicitors, tax accountants, as well as exhibitors there. We're exhibiting there as an estate agent and as part of our webinar programme as well. But it's a really informative event for landlords. It's completely free to attend, and it's 5 till 9 p.m. on September the 22nd, and I'll put a link to that as well in the follow-up email I send. But it is really worthwhile going to, because you'll learn a lot there as well, especially if you sort of manage your own property. So it's definitely worth going to. So that's all from me this evening. Thank you very much, everybody. Any other questions, please do feel free to email or give me a call. I'm more than happy to help you, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you on the next webinar. Thank you. Bye.